When director Ron Howard decided to make Apollo 13, he refused to treat it like an ordinary Hollywood space movie. Most films before it had relied on wires, camera tricks, and visual effects to imitate astronauts floating in zero gravity. Howard believed audiences would instantly sense the difference between fake movement and real weightlessness, so he pushed for something nobody expected a major production to attempt. He secured access to NASA's KC-135 aircraft, famously called the Vomit Comet, a plane designed to create real zero-gravity conditions through steep parabolic dives. During every maneuver, the aircraft produced about 23 seconds of genuine weightlessness before gravity violently returned. Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, and Bill Paxton spent nearly 2 weeks filming inside that aircraft, enduring more than 600 dives altogether. Crew members became sick constantly, cameras drifted uncontrollably, and many takes failed completely. Yet the result transformed the film into something audiences had never experienced before. The zero-gravity scenes looked effortless on screen, but filming them became one of the hardest physical challenges the cast had ever faced. Every sequence inside the aircraft had to be planned with military precision because the crew only had seconds to capture usable footage before gravity returned. Actors floated into walls, cameras spun out of alignment, and equipment repeatedly crashed into the ceiling as the plane shifted direction. Even worse, the roaring engines of the aircraft made the original dialogue completely unusable. Every line spoken during the weightlessness scenes had to be re-recorded later in a studio, carefully synchronized with the actors' floating movements. Ron Howard understood that real discomfort would create authenticity impossible to fake with special effects. By the end of production, the actors had adapted to the strange sensation of moving without gravity. Tom Hanks approached the role of astronaut Jim Lovell with a level of obsession that surprised nearly everyone on set. He did not simply memorize lines or study the script. Instead, he immersed himself in NASA procedures, emergency checklists, cockpit layouts, and authentic mission transcripts until he practically functioned like a trained astronaut. Crew members joked that Hanks had become the production's accuracy police, because he constantly corrected technical mistakes in props, dialogue, and spacecraft operations. If a button appeared in the wrong place or a line sounded inaccurate, he demanded changes immediately. The real Jim Lovell visited the set and later admitted he was shocked by how completely Hanks captured not only his voice but also his personality, calmness, and dry sense of humor. Between takes, Hanks quietly repeated spacecraft procedures to himself inside his trailer, treating the routines like rituals. By the final weeks of filming, Ron Howard claimed Hanks could probably operate a command module simulator independently. Ed Harris brought a completely different style of intensity to the production while portraying legendary flight director Gene Kranz. Harris believed the role demanded total control and discipline, so he created one strict personal rule: the camera must never catch him visibly acting. To maintain the illusion, he remained in character between takes, kept his NASA headset on during breaks, and even stayed emotionally connected to the tension of mission control while cameras reset around him. Howard wired the control room consoles with real NASA-style telemetry feeds so Harris could react naturally to changing information instead of pretending. His famous line, "Failure is not an option," eventually became one of the most iconic moments in film history, even though the real Gene Kranz never actually said those exact words during the mission. Ron Howard pushed realism far beyond visual details by forcing the actors to experience some of the physical misery the real astronauts endured. The spacecraft scenes were filmed on soundstages deliberately cooled to freezing temperatures so the actors' breath would appear naturally on camera. Howard wanted audiences to feel the unbearable cold that developed aboard Apollo 13 after the crew shut down systems to conserve power. Inside the cramped lunar module set, conditions became even worse. The structure was built at nearly exact scale, leaving the actors squeezed tightly together with minimal airflow and intense studio lights raising the temperature rapidly. Bill Paxton later admitted the claustrophobic environment became overwhelming and exhausting during long shooting days. Howard refused requests to make conditions easier because he believed genuine discomfort would shape the performances. As frustration, fatigue, and irritation built naturally among the cast, those emotions began appearing inside scenes without anyone forcing them. The set no longer felt like a recreation of Apollo 13. It felt frighteningly close to the real experience. The casting process behind Apollo 13 was far more chaotic than most audiences realized. Kevin Bacon eventually played astronaut Jack Swigert, but the role originally seemed headed toward John Cusack before negotiations collapsed. Bacon entered the project with far less preparation time than the other actors, forcing him to rely heavily on NASA consultants and Tom Hanks's growing collection of technical research. Surprisingly, Bacon's slightly restless energy ended up matching the real circumstances perfectly because Swigert himself had joined the Apollo 13 crew at the last minute after another astronaut was exposed to German measles. However, the film's portrayal of Swigert later sparked criticism from people who knew the real astronaut personally. Real illness and genuine physical exhaustion also shaped several performances in unexpected ways during production. Bill Paxton became seriously sick with influenza while filming, developing a high fever severe enough that the crew considered delaying his scenes. Paxton refused to stop working and continued filming despite obvious exhaustion, pale skin, and visible weakness. Ron Howard quickly realized the illness accidentally mirrored what happened to Fred Haise during the real Apollo 13 mission, where the astronauts suffered from a painful urinary tract infection while trapped inside the freezing spacecraft. Instead of hiding Paxton's deteriorating condition, Howard used it to strengthen the realism of the scenes. Meanwhile, Gary Sinise faced a completely different challenge while portraying astronaut Ken Mattingly, the grounded crew member who never flew on the mission but played a critical role in saving it. Sinise spent weeks training inside NASA simulators until he could operate complex procedures naturally without looking down at the controls, earning admiration from actual astronauts visiting the set. NASA originally resisted the idea of helping Apollo 13 because officials worried the movie would remind audiences of one of the agency's greatest disasters instead of its achievements. Many within NASA feared the film would damage public perception by focusing entirely on failure and catastrophe. Ron Howard changed their minds by arguing that Apollo 13 represented one of the greatest examples of human problem-solving and teamwork ever seen in space exploration. Rather than telling a failure story, the film celebrated how astronauts and engineers overcame impossible odds using intelligence, discipline, and creativity. NASA eventually embraced the production so completely that filmmakers gained access to the Johnson Space Center, astronaut simulators, authentic mission equipment, and former Apollo personnel. Some of the film's most impressive details remained almost invisible to general audiences because the production focused obsessively on authenticity instead of spectacle. The sound team layered genuine NASA recordings, radio interference, and distorted communications into the soundtrack so every transmission sounded fragile and distant instead of polished. Rotating gimbal rigs physically spun the actors inside spacecraft replicas during turbulent scenes, causing real nausea and dizziness. Tom Hanks reportedly vomited after multiple takes while Bill Paxton nearly blacked out during another session. Even the launch sequence blended miniatures and archival Saturn V footage so carefully that many viewers never realized visual effects were involved at all. Jim Lovell himself appeared briefly in the movie as the Navy captain welcoming the astronauts home after splashdown, wearing his actual Navy uniform from his real career. Small decisions like these gave Apollo 13 a documentary-like credibility that separated it from ordinary Hollywood productions and convinced audiences they were witnessing genuine historical events unfold. When Apollo 13 premiered in 1995, nobody expected it to reignite public fascination with space exploration. NASA had been struggling with budget cuts, declining attention, and fading excitement surrounding the space program throughout the early 1990s. The film unexpectedly changed that atmosphere almost overnight. Visitor numbers at NASA centers increased, aerospace engineering programs reported growing enrollment, and many future astronauts later admitted the movie inspired their interest in spaceflight. Ironically, some viewers believed the ending felt unrealistically optimistic because Hollywood had trained audiences to distrust stories where disaster ends successfully. In reality, the astronauts truly survived against overwhelming odds.